Marys. And yeah, this is a book that's the product of a number of years of research in northeastern China, which actually I'll just show you. I can remember how to get there. We go. So this is the city of Shenyang. You can see the map of China down there inset, and then this is up in the northeast,
Oh,
pretty close to
sorry.
North Korea.
Sorry to
Sorry.
interrupt you.
Yeah.
We're still on the first slide. We're still just seeing
Oh,
the PowerPoint.
okay.
So you may have to go to like start slideshow, I think.
I did
Ah,
that on my.
there we
Is
go.
that working?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
still in the just in PowerPoint. It hasn't started the presentation, but we can see
let's just go with that.
yeah, that works. We
I
can
don't
see the
know
map.
why it's doing that, but we'll go with it. We'll sort it out as we go.
Yeah, we can see what you're talking
Um,
about. So that's the
so
main thing.
yeah, this is a map of Shenyang. You can see China inset at the bottom, and then we're up in the northeast, kind of near North Korea. But it's about a 2-hour, 3-hour train ride from North Korea. Very kind of flat, open city, and it's a really big. It's actually a population of about 7.5 million people right now. It's a provincial capital, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it in a second. But and in fact, I think I'll just minimize that for now because we don't need to know much more about what's going on the map. I'm a linguistic anthropologist. I do research on language learning, not so much how to do it better, but what it means to speak a different language. Particularly in my case, a global language like English in a developing country like China. And I started working in China. Now I've done about 12 years of research, but I first went there in 2001. So it's been about 20 years. I went there during that. There was a really, really nasty cold winter, and I was there in January. It was minus 20, minus 30 for an entire month, and I was going there to just learn some Mandarin. I had some student debt I wanted to pay off. I hadn't started my PhD yet, and I thought I'm going to go to this place. I'm going to learn some Mandarin because I want to do a PhD on. Well, my master's thesis was about these state actors who kind of mediate between entrepreneurs and government offices. And I thought this will be, a kind of cool topic. And I went there and I started asking people about it. And I quickly realized that this was not going to work because the people who do this, it's a kind of quasi-legal activity. No one wanted to talk about, giving bribes and giving banquets and sort of working under the table and stuff like that. But everyone wanted to talk about English. And so that's kind of what sparked my interest initially. I mean, it was everyone would come up to me. I was talking to like students and teachers and even the administrators at the school I was working because I was teaching English and doing Mandarin classes on the side. And just up on the street, people would come up to me and start asking me questions. They'd say things like, how do you learn English? How many words do I need to know if I want to study in Canada? What's the best accent I should learn? And do you have any tricks that would help me become fluent more quickly? And I got sort of curious about this whole thing because it was very puzzling for me. If you look at the broader context, if we go back about 40 years to around 1978, a couple years after Mao Zedong died, there were about probably a couple thousand people in all of China who were fluent in English. Some of them had learned in missionary schools before the communist era. Some of them had learned abroad and studied as interpreters, but it was a very small number of people. And China was just coming out of what was called the Cultural Revolution. It was a 10-year period from the late 60s through the 70s where universities were closed down, schools were shut down, young people were sent out to the countryside to learn farming from peasants and things like that. And basically, all of China was engaged in this kind of political activity where you were purifying socialism and eliminating any kind of bourgeois influence. And that meant foreign languages had to go. So in 1978, really, there were very few people who could speak English, who could teach English in China. Compare that to today, where the most recent estimates I've seen are there's about a 350 million to 400 million Chinese people who can carry on a conversation in English. And that's in the space of 40 years. That is the largest, the most ambitious, and the most successful language learning program in human history. And it's something that really fascinates me. I'm trying to understand what's going on. Today, English is deeply integrated into everyone's life in China. It's required in school. So from grade 3 onwards, it's a required subject in school. When you write your high school and university entrance examinations, it's about 1/5 of your score is English language. Most children in the city will attend evening and weekend classes in private English language schools, which I'll show you a couple pictures of what they look like. And if I can get this to work. These are some of the schools that I worked in and studied in. You can see some of the posters and that they have, all these kind of smiling white faces on the advertisement. And then these are really big places, like 3-story tall schools with 20 or 30 classrooms in them, with children running around learning English lessons and stuff like that. This is a picture of Jasmine, one of the teachers I worked with quite closely. She's teaching a children's English class she rented a room out of a library in Shenyang and taught classes there for many years. So it gives you a sense of what these places look like. When you go to get a job in Shenyang, when you go down to there's a human resource market where it's like an ongoing everyday job fair. You take your resume and you take your English language test scores from high school. When you want to get promoted in that job, you also have to show your test scores to show them that you can speak English. And people learn English to do business, to do research as academics, for international travel, to correspond with foreign companies and things like that. And it's even used on an everyday basis in like radio and television, advertising, retail, and things like that. There's signs in English everywhere. And even elderly people will often throw English phrases into their speech. Like if when you're talking to people in Shenyang today, instead of saying 再见 when when you leave, you'll say bye-bye. And you'll hear people say things like, no pain, no gain, and little phrases like that to illustrate kind of what they're thinking. It's just everywhere. It's ubiquitous. But here's the thing for me. This is the puzzle. 350 to 400 million people who have learned English. And really only a very small fraction of them will use English, like in their professional lives. A lot of the people I met would say like, oh, you're the first like foreign person, the first native speaker of English I've ever met. And the most common place to meet native English speakers is actually in the English classroom itself. And so I couldn't understand what is going on. What is motivating this? Like, why are you teaching English to 350 million people in this country? And when I asked people, well, they'd say things like, well, China's developing, globalization, World Trade Organization, the Olympics in 2022. We need to learn English. We need to learn English to create a strong country. And I said, yes, but you're a cop, or you're a manager of a hardware store. Why do you need to learn English? Like, what's motivating you? And people didn't really have a good answer for that. But the more I talked to people and learned about their lives, the more it kind of became clear. So to explain this, I was watching a TV show. It's like a Chinese television drama in Shenyang. And the story is this. Here's the plot. There's this young guy, and he lives in the rural village out in the countryside. And he doesn't have a lot of educational opportunities, but he studies English really, really hard. And because of that, he can go to the city and he gets a job as a security guard at a company, just standing at the front gate, directing traffic and telling people to stop and things like that. And at one point in the first season, there's some tourists that are lost, and he gives them directions in English. And the company owner is watching him out the window and goes, "Oh, this guy speaks English. Oh, this is good." So he promotes him to become his personal driver. Later in the season, they're driving around, and this guy overhears their sales manager talking English on the phone. And he goes, "Uh-oh, he doesn't speak good English." And when he stops the car, he pulls the company owner aside. He says, "That your sales manager doesn't speak that kind of good English. He speaks that kind of Chinglish, that bad English. And we have a big international sale we're trying to make." And everyone's, "Oh no." And so they fire the sales manager and promote the driver. And he goes into the meeting and he meets the foreign partners and he speaks fluent English to them, and everyone laughs and shakes hands and they make the deal. And that's what it's all about. That's what English is about. It's about social class. It's about anxieties over education. It's about financial and economic opportunity and success, particularly since most Chinese families only have one child. So they focus all of their kind of hopes for the future on this one child. And it's about this kind of feeling of being left behind in the economic and social transformations that are happening in China. Speaking English pushes you forward, and not speaking English means you're going to be trapped and left out of it. The Indian linguist Braj Khatru is talking about the role of English in India. He says English has this kind of alchemy, this kind of alchemical power to transform people into new types of citizens. You move from a rural, isolated, backwards kind of peasant into a global, modern, cosmopolitan elite through the power of English. And that's what the stakes are in China as well. It's this kind of these new ideas of a global citizen or a cosmopolitan social actor that you achieve through the use of English. So in the book, then, I have to bring a couple concepts in to talk about this, and I want to introduce them briefly and define them for you. They both come from the work of an early 20th century Russian linguist named Mikhail Bakhtin, which sounds, I know, really esoteric and really hard to read, but he is a really interesting person. He had a profound influence on linguistic anthropology. The first of these concepts is what's called heteroglossia. Bakhtin argues that when we are speaking, we are not speaking coherent languages. We are speaking kind of multiple overlapping styles and registers of language that reflect our accents and dialects, our age, our place of origin, our profession, our gender, our ethnicity, and all these other things. In other words, he says our speech is really, really messy, and it's never the same as anyone else's. Okay, that's heteroglossia. The second idea he comes up with is what's called the chronotope, which is the kind of time value of language. He says, when you take that messy form of speech and kind of, as a society, we put it into these categories called languages. We do that by putting values on them as well. Some forms of language have a lot of prestige. Others are considered lower class or stigmatized. Okay? So they get these kind of values attached to them. Your accent, for instance, will be tied to a place of origin, like Scotland or Australia or Canada or something like that. And then those accents often have relationships to time. Some accents sound quaint and rustic, and timeless, by which we mean they kind of come out of the past. And then other accents sound modern and urban and busy and forward-looking, and those seem to come out of the future. And that's kind of really valuable then for me to look at English in China, because, first of all, what is English? We act as if there's this kind of clearly defined thing called the English language out there that we can sort of refer to as, this person is speaking it correctly, this person is not. But what I found in Shenyang was that people actually encounter many different Englishes throughout their sort of everyday learning experiences. You get, for instance, examination English, the English you learn for these, multiple choice tests that people have to take in school to get into university. And it's a very different kind of English from what they learn in conversational classes. So I'll just give you an example. Probably my students have heard this before, but I'll give it for all of you here. Here is a question from the 2011 University Entrance Exam Preparation Guidebook. And this is what you have to know to get into a good university in China. I'll give you a sentence, and it's an A, B, C, or D answer. The bear blank the hunter from behind. Okay, and your options are A, grabbed, B, grasped, C, clasped, or D, clutched. The bear grasped the hunter from behind, the bear clasped the hunter from behind, grabbed the hunter, or clutched the hunter. So I was grabbed, grasped, clasped, or clutched. And I guess the question is, do any of you know the answer? Does anyone want to guess? Grabbed, grasped, clasped, or clutched? And there's only one correct answer.
Grasp.
Anyone? You can type it in the chat. Jonathan? Grasped, says Jonathan. Okay. Vivek says grasped. Okay. Kieran says grabbed. I'm really sorry. None of you are going to be going to Beijing University to study anything, really, because you need English to study anything. You need English to study Chinese literature. The answer is C, clasped. And the reason is because all of the other words require the use of opposable thumbs, and bears don't have opposable thumbs. And that's the kind of lexical, formal knowledge of English you have to go to a good university in China. So, yeah, it's very different from what people do in oral English classes, where there's a lot of back and forth between students and teachers. There's an emphasis on kind of like the speed of speech, pronunciation, even things like argumentation and style and stuff like that. So examination English, oral English, they're very different kinds of language. And this is what Bakhtin means by heteroglossia. And there's also kind of cool English that people kind of throw into their speech. There's all sorts of different varieties, and it all just kind of gets, sort of combined together, although it comes from different sources. So it's a good sort of illustration then of this idea of heteroglossia. The other interesting thing is that the English is also influenced by the other languages that are being spoken. So Mandarin Chinese is the predominant language. There's also a local dialect called Dongbeihua, and then you have English. And English words are often affected by the semantic content of Mandarin Chinese words. So the English word quality, for instance, is often used to represent the Mandarin word suzhi, which actually refers to someone's kind of refinement or civilized nature or something like that. And so you get kind of Mandarin meanings imported into English. One of the most well-known English words in China today is the English word PK. And people would use this in conversation with me all the time. And they would say, well, it's like PK. And I'd say, what does that mean? And they say, well, what do you mean? What does that mean? It's an English word and you're an English speaker. Why don't you know what it means? Well, PK comes from internet slang, from first-person shooters. It's player killed. And then it got actually imported into Chinese reality shows where they'd have like head-to-head competitions, like elimination rounds, and that was called the PK. And then I'd see it used in like the employee of the month contest was called the PK contest in the local shopping mall. So it gets, you get these English words that sort of take on a life of their own that I, as an English speaker, had no idea about. So that's, again, this kind of idea of heteroglossia. The other part of this, the chronotope, the idea of the time value of language, is actually related to the kind of spatial arrangements in China. And again, I'm just going to bring up a couple images to show you. So if you look at this is I think 18th century map, French map of Peking, the capital of the Chinese Empire at the time. And you can see right there in the middle, the Forbidden City with its kind of wall around it that no one could go into except the emperor and his retainers and family. And then the Imperial City is the larger rectangle around it. And then you have the walls of Beijing around that. And then up north of that, past the edge of the map, is the Great Wall, which encloses the entire empire itself. And a lot of Chinese people pointed out to me, China's all about walls. If you want to know China, you got to know about your walls. And that's actually the way the city is organized today. If you look at some pictures of the city, you can see these buildings, these big apartment blocks, and they're all sort of like enclosing little courtyards and things like that, where they have playground equipment and people sort of relax, and talk to neighbors. But it's very separate from the busy streets outside. You can even see this is one of the new neighborhoods in Shenyang. Again, you get these big, tall apartment buildings, but they're enclosing these kind of neighborhoods that inside are very quiet, where people just kind of relax and take it easy. During the imperial period, space was organized in a kind of like recursive enclosure where you would have neighborhoods, like houses surrounded by walls, surrounded by neighborhoods with walls, surrounded by cities with walls, and then the empire itself had the walls around it. And a lot of historians have argued that what that does is it kind of synchronizes everything. The patriarch of a household, a priest in the temple, the emperor himself, are all engaged in similar activities, worshiping the gods or the ancestors and so on. And by doing the same thing in their same spaces, it actually creates the empire as this sort of timeless character. It's a timeless entity. In the 19th century, when you had colonial places like Shanghai and Hong Kong, you started to get more modern Western style spaces in this landscape. And that kind of actually broke the idea of synchronization. Now everything was out of sync. You had traditional neighborhoods where people would do things differently. They would wear different clothes and they would speak a different language. And then you'd have the European neighborhoods where everything was modern. They had cars, they dressed differently, and they spoke languages like English. And that has kind of continued today. You have different types of neighborhoods surrounded by their walls that all have kind of different time values associated with them. And that affects the kinds of language you hear. So five-star hotels and luxury malls and so on are spaces that are coded as being English speaking. And old socialist style neighborhoods and sort of quiet places are where you'll hear the local dialect or Mandarin Chinese. One of the best examples I found of this was in the Shenyang metro station, the subway station that opened in 2011, I think. They had these big flat screens playing videos of how to ride a subway like a civilized person. And they would show, people getting ready to get on the subway, but they all make way for people to get off first. And there's a person in a wheelchair. Will you let that person go on first? And they even had a picture of this guy who's pulling out some kind of like messy snack to eat, and his girlfriend starts hitting him. Go, don't do that on the subway. You're supposed to ride it in a civilized fashion, right? The subway is different from people who ride donkey carts or other forms or bicycles or other forms of transportation. And when you're in the subway, the language you hear constantly is English. All the signs have English on them. All the announcements are done in English. Everything has English on it. And, okay, there might be like a couple tourists who get lost and need that kind of English information, but the more important job it's doing is to symbolically encode this place as being an English speaking environment where you, the Chinese customer, are expected to be an English speaker and manifest these kinds of civilized behaviors. So there's some really interesting things going on with the ways in which time is attached to language and sort of ideas about personhood and like I said, quality and civilization and so on. And it's this kind of very interesting complex of symbolic values, which is really what I'm interested in. I think it's what motivates, English study and English acquisition in Xinjiang. That's the first couple chapters, I guess. In the rest of the book, I spend like one chapter. I look at how people narrate their lives around English. I look at, I talk about when they're young and they say, oh, I was so naive and foolish. I didn't know the real meaning or the real value of English. But as I got older, I learned about it. I became a more confident person, and maybe I eventually went abroad or something like that. And so people actually narrate their lives through language, through thinking about their acquisition of language. So it's a really interesting kind of phenomenon there. I also look at the business of English because English has really become a commodity that is bought and sold in a marketplace where you have these private schools. They hire the best teachers. They try to attract the best students. And there's all these kinds of really interesting business practices around marketing and branding and so on that go on as people try to sell English to a large customer base in Xinjiang. I spent some time looking at that idea of Chinglish, this kind of inauthentic English, which, as a Canadian, you see on the internet, and people post images that, look at this, English I found on a sign in China. It's really funny. But in China itself, the idea of Chinglish can mean anything from just having a Chinese accent to using phrases incorrectly. It is basically saying you're not an authentic speaker of English. You're not a person who manifests those values correctly. It can even mean, like, it can even be used to represent the power and authority of some people over others. So for instance, I was interviewing these two university students once. There was a boyfriend and girlfriend, and the girl was saying, like, oh, I try to speak English, but I don't do a very good job. And her boyfriend starts laughing. He goes, yeah, she always speaks that kind of Chinglish. She always speaks the Chinese kind of English. Like, for instance, when she sees someone she hasn't seen in a while, she'll say, hi, like, long time no see. And we all know that's from Mandarin Chinese. That's hao jiu bu jian. And I said, well, actually, that's something a lot of Canadians would say. And she's like, I knew it. And she started hitting her boyfriend. She's like, I knew I was right. But, he was kind of saying, like, look, that's not authentic because it comes from, or it follows the sort of pattern of Mandarin Chinese. When, as a native speaker, I had no problem with it. So it's about kind of power and the ability of some people to kind of monitor and judge the language of others. And then the final thing I look at is the idea of foreign teachers, these kind of Canadian, American, British, Australian people who go to China to teach, the relationships between them and their students, the relationships between them and the Chinese English teachers, which can be very interesting because foreign teachers are often judged by the color of their skin rather than their educational credentials or background. Your white skin is a guarantee that you speak good English, which means that African American speakers or Asian American speakers who might have, their family might have immigrated to the United States generations ago would still be looked down on in the educational environment of Shenyang in comparison to people from Russia and Sweden who often got jobs as English teachers because of the ways they looked. And this is to say nothing of also the kinds of racism that the Chinese teachers experienced, who often had like degrees from British universities. I knew teachers who had a master's degree from a British university who got paid far less than just some American guy who had an undergraduate degree and was traveling around China for a year. So there's ways in which race and ethnicity play into the kinds of inequalities of language in Xinjiang as well. And so I was looking at how, why do people come up with this association between, racial appearance and language? And it's largely through these kinds of marketing practices that schools engage in. You saw the poster earlier of the English school, it's all white people. It's this kind of convenient way of marking someone's language ability through the color of their skin. And so it's really trying to look at this entire complex of language, social value, the idea of kind of the future or past value of certain types of language, and the ways in which learning English can kind of propel you into China's future, can actually push you past all of the other people who are not learning English in China and are kind of getting left behind in this really quickly developing economic and social transformation that's happening. So yeah, that's my 40 minutes, I think, Shauna, of the kind of quick overview of the book, and I hope it gives you a sense of what's going on, and I hope it sort of sparks your interest. And I think Shauna said, there's time for questions. If anyone wants to ask anything, just go ahead. Like Nicole, you've got or are you clapping, Nicole? Or
I was clapping.
Okay, well that's fine. That's fine too.
Yeah, and I will just to if people are more comfortable, I'll stop the recording for the Q&A section. So just to let you know.
Fair enough.